Are you concerned that you might have a problem with gambling? Maybe you're spending more money than you plan to, or you're starting to feel uncomfortable when you're not gambling, and you wonder, can I really be addicted to gambling? So stick around because I'm going to talk more about this issue, which is increasingly becoming a problem for people. Now is always the time to start making positive changes in your life. Dr. Donna Leigh Bliss here. On this channel, I promote optimal mental health and well-being to help you become the best version of yourself. Gambling. If you watch television commercials during sporting events, there's ad after ad for sports books. Ever since the Supreme Court ruled that gambling can be done again across state lines, you see ads for casinos, for betting on your phone, and it sounds really exciting. It's almost like playing video games. But yet, for many people, gambling can become problematic. So as the gambling spreads, not just from casinos to state lotteries to sports books, there's more and more opportunities for people to enjoy gambling, but to get into trouble as well. So we're going to talk more about problem gambling or compulsive gambling, but more specifically to help answer the question, am I addicted to gambling? And if so, what can I do about it? So it's hard to believe at one time in this country, legal gambling was only in the state of Nevada. Up until the 1970s, if you wanted to gamble legally, that's where you went. And then starting in the 70s, Atlantic City, New Jersey, in an attempt to revitalize the community, legalized gambling. And then states started having lotteries. There was still a strong moral prohibition against gambling, and so states position these lotteries as raising money for education, which is hard to say no to. And then you just found over time that states, always looking for money for programs, started legalizing casinos. More and more states would compete and have lotteries. And then soon gambling was prevalent throughout the country. A few years ago, the Supreme Court ruled that gambling can be done across state lines, which opened up what's called sports books, which means now in most states you can gamble on virtually anything, anywhere from your phone. And so it's become not only very popular, but a big problem for many people, especially younger men. So one of the things that I've been interested in as a clinical social worker is working with clients who have gambling problems. And while the term compulsive gambler is typically used, many have asked me if they're addicted to gambling. So let's explore that. So you might think, well, can I be addicted to gambling? I'm not taking a drug. And the notion of addiction, which is usually to a chemical, alcohol, heroin, cocaine, something that we know is addictive, is pretty common, although not everybody who takes those drugs gets addicted. But gambling addiction falls under the category of a process addiction, where we're not taking a drug, but there's something about the activity, the behavior, that stimulates the pleasure centers of our brain, as if we are taking a drug, and the activity can be so pleasurable that we want it more and more and more and more. When you talk to compulsive gamblers, they'll talk about the action, which is the anticipation of winning, the doing their research, the coming up with a strategy, placing the bet, waiting to see what the outcome is going to be, knowing that every bet has a possibility for being a big winner, although statistically speaking, that doesn't happen. So what happens inside the brain for some people is the pleasure centers are activated as if the person is actually taking a drug. And I will tell you, I've worked in addictions for many, many years, and process addictions, whether it's to compulsive overeating, problems with sex addiction, compulsive gambling, I think are true addictions. The thing that's interesting is the definition of addiction really doesn't have so much to do with how much you do or how often, but it's whether your use is causing problems in important areas of your life and you continue to engage in the behavior. So let's say that your gambling is causing you great financial difficulties. Money that you would use to pay for your rent or your car payment, you're now placing bets, hoping to win big only to lose again. Or perhaps you've been hiding your gambling from a spouse and now are living a double life. Or perhaps you're so preoccupied with looking at your phone to see what is the result of the latest event you gambled on, maybe somewhere in another country, that you're not doing your work very well and your boss is starting to become concerned about your productivity. Well, a person that doesn't have a problem with gambling is going to try to either really cut back or stop. But if you become addicted to gambling, it becomes virtually impossible to stop, because the craving for that high, just like the craving for crack cocaine or the craving for alcohol, can become so strong that it overrides our judgment and we end up satisfying the craving by engaging in that behavior of taking a drug once again. If you've ever tried to stop smoking, you've seen how powerful craving can be. It can be so uncomfortable that you'll do anything for cigarettes. And then once you do smoke, it relieves the craving so you feel better, but the withdrawal is going to come back again and the craving just gets worse. And that's one of the hallmarks of addiction. So research has looked into trying to understand what happens in the mind of somebody who is gambling. And so one of the things that's interesting is that when we have a gambling win, the brain releases what's called a feel-good chemical called dopamine. But when we gamble often, our brain gets used to the dopamine, which makes that winning feeling difficult to achieve, which means you need to win bigger and bigger bets or take more and more risks to get that emotional payoff. So consequently, we may have to gamble more and more to feel the same level of pleasure with our gambling. So if you're wondering, do you have a problem with gambling? There's a wonderful resource you can use, Gamblers Anonymous, which is a 12-step program modeled after Alcoholics Anonymous. And it has a list of 20 questions that you can ask yourself. And I think the rule of thumb is most compulsive gamblers answer yes to at least 7 of the questions. So I'm not going to read over all the questions. I encourage you to go on the website and do that for yourself. I think you'll find it very interesting. But some of the questions really are informative, and they help you to start to understand whether you have a problem with gambling and whether indeed you are addicted to gambling. So here is a sample of just some of the questions. Question number 1, did you ever lose time from work or school due to gambling? Question 4, have you ever felt remorse after gambling? Question 8, after a win, did you have a strong urge to return and win more? Question 12, were you reluctant to use your gambling money for normal expenditures? Question 16, have you ever committed or considered committing an illegal act to finance your gambling? Question 18, do arguments, disappointments, or frustrations create with you an urge to gamble? So these are representative questions that you can ask yourself, and you might find that listening to yourself say yes to many of these questions helps clarify that indeed you do have a problem with gambling and need to do something about it. So maybe on your own you've been able to cut back on your gambling, although I bet you if you answered yes to many of the 20 questions, cutting back has been very difficult. You might be really preoccupied thinking about gambling all the time, feeling tempted to open an app in your phone and check out the score of something you wanted to bet on, or maybe you started making smaller bets in the hope that you can control it. Alcoholics do this too. They change their drinking, they ration it, they schedule it out, they come up with various strategies trying to control their drinking that invariably don't work out. So what do you do if you have a problem and if you're really concerned if you're addicted to gambling? One of the first things you can do is talk to a therapist, especially a therapist who has a background working in addictions. Now, not all addictions are the same, but the dynamics are very similar. So somebody that has worked with people with alcohol and drug problems has probably also worked with people with gambling problems. And so talking with somebody about this is a good first step towards starting to make some changes in your life. The second is to use a support group. In my experience, it's virtually impossible to stay stopped from an addictive disorder, no matter how great the wish. I've worked with many alcoholics in my career, and it's rare that somebody that can stop drinking and stay stopped. It's one of the reasons why I recommend they try out Alcoholics Anonymous, which is very effective in helping people live a sober life. So along those lines, Gamblers Anonymous is a support group of men and women that have a problem with gambling. And it's a spiritually based approach, similar to Alcoholics Anonymous, that is designed to help you live a life free of gambling, a day at a time, where you feel good about yourself. It's helped many, many people. I currently have clients that I'm working with now that participate in the program, and they talk to me about how it's helping them. They don't feel so alone. It's helpful to be able to talk to other people that sometimes struggle with the urges to gamble. And they talk about how they just feel inspired to keep working on trying to stay sober from gambling, and that ultimately the quality of their life improves. So I encourage you to check that out. Compulsive gambling is a serious problem. I wouldn't minimize it. If you're concerned about your gambling, and if you don't like to admit that you're addicted to it, fair enough. But problematic gambling can really get worse in somebody's life, and what usually happens is your ability to control your gambling gets more and more impaired to the point it starts to consume your life. So I encourage you to get help. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it informative and helpful. Please click on the subscribe button if you'd like to receive notifications of future videos. I've also included links for other videos you might find helpful. Remember, now is always the time to start making positive changes in your life. I'll see you next time.